Welcome to the debate. So, a financial ledger is, well, it's supposed to be the ultimate source of truth. Clean, mathematical, binary. You look at the columns, line up the debits against the credits, and, the numbers just balance out perfectly.
Right. It's supposed to be totally objective.
Exactly. But today, we are looking at a master ledger where the ink is literal blood, and the bottom line is measured entirely in human lives.
Yeah, it is the absolute definition of a zero-sum game. And I think what makes this material so compelling is that we aren't just looking at the abstraction of finance here. We are watching it play out with devastating, irreversible real-world consequences on the pavement.
We're exploring a really brutal intersection today. Basically, the exact point where street-level vigilante justice collides with white-collar corporate corruption. We are looking at the conflict surrounding Liberty Structural, the money laundering operation above Kwan's 24-hour Express, and this central burning question. Did Malachi's violent extraction of the master ledger represent a justified, necessary disruption of a rigged system? Or did his actions ultimately mirror the exact monstrous exploitation that he sought to destroy?
Which is a huge question.
It is. And I'll state my position right at the top. I believe Malachi's actions were a necessary, self-sacrificing mechanism to dismantle an impenetrable corporate shield. I mean, it proves that when a system is fundamentally rigged to protect its architects, it sometimes requires extreme, even catastrophic disruption to achieve the truth.
And I take a vastly different view on the cost of that disruption. I argue that Malachi's descent into violence represents a tragic, profound moral failure. By stepping outside the law, he adopted the exact ruthless tactics of his oppressors. He inflicted permanent psychological trauma on innocents, and, well, he ultimately proved that vigilante justice corrupts its own ends, regardless of the original intent. You just cannot dismantle a corrupt system by simply becoming a new apex predator within it.
Let's ground this in the philosophy of what a rigged system actually looks like in this narrative. The traditional legal avenues were completely compromised. Marcus Collins basically built a fortress out of bureaucracy.
Oh, absolutely.
He used his immense wealth to commit violence via paperwork from the comfort of a walnut-paneled study. Like, when Travis discovered the skimming from the Union Pension Fund, Collins didn't just fire him. He ordered Riemann Cruz to plant 5 kilos of narcotics in Travis's trunk. The system didn't just fail Travis. Bureaucracy was literally weaponized to bury him alive in SCI Phoenix.
The framing of Travis is undeniably horrific, and I don't think anyone would argue that the system functioned properly there. But, we have to separate the injustice Travis suffered from the sheer, uncontrolled devastation of Malachi's response. You are essentially arguing that the ends justify the means. But look at the means. Malachi didn't just steal a book. He orchestrated an armed invasion that enabled a bloodbath.
Well, he went in for the evidence. The violence was collateral to the extraction of the physical paper trail. It really was the only way to breach the corporate insulation.
I have to push back there. He went in with a heavily armed crew and specifically gave the order for no witnesses.
Right, but
that is not a collateral accident. That is a premeditated directive, and that specific order led Terrell to crush Raymond's skull with a steel crowbar. It created an environment of severe armed threat that resulted in 2 deaths, including, a young cage guard. I just cannot buy the argument that you can justify a moral crusade that requires the execution of others just to protect yourself from cartel retaliation.
But let's examine the nature of that violence, because this is where the equivalency gets deeply uncomfortable. We tend to view what Malachi did as objectively worse because it's messy, it's loud, right?
Because it's murder.
But white-collar crime is treated as less violent simply because it is sanitized. It relies entirely on the illusion of distance. Bureaucracy is essentially a technology designed to launder human suffering into abstract numbers. Corporate corruption is like a silent, odorless gas. It suffocates entire communities, ruins generations of families, and it doesn't make a sound. Malachi was sort of the shattering of a window to let in the air.
That sounds incredibly poetic. but it completely ignores the visceral reality of a .45 caliber round tearing through a human throat. Yes, hiding behind shell companies like Anvil Logistics is insidious. I agree. It destroys lives over time. But there is a fundamental philosophical difference between structural violence and direct physical murder.
Is there, though? If the result is the same,
Yes, when Marcus Collins commits fraud, he is stealing futures. When Terrell shoots a guard, he is extinguishing a life in a fraction of a second. It is immediate and irreversible.
but you're isolating the shooting from the system that made it inevitable. Think about the sheer brilliance of the money laundering mechanics Collins engineered. He needed to bribe local union bosses to look the other way on uncertified steel, but I mean, you can't write a corporate check with bribe in the memo line.
Right.
So he creates this unbreakable loop. Phantom contractors cash the checks, bring the dirty money to the vault, intentionally lose it to the house, and then Raymond Cruz pays out the union bosses as casino winnings. The money goes in dirty and comes out with a perfectly clean alibi, fully taxable and above board. Collins built an ecosystem where he reaped all the financial rewards, but offloaded 100% of the physical and legal risk onto disposable blue-collar workers. Malachi simply brought the brutal, unforgiving rules of that vault directly to the manicured lawns of Chestnut Hill. He forced the architect to face the physical reality of his own paperwork.
You're praising the strategic mirroring, but look at how poorly Malachi actually managed it on the ground. I mean, for someone trying to perform a surgical extraction, he knowingly brought a heavy hydraulic door-breaching tool to a stealth operation. They traded the possibility of digital immediacy for overwhelming physical chaos.
Wait, explain to me how you view that as a contradiction. The mechanics of the heist preparation were actually a masterclass in managing a rigid system. Jin taps into the local junction box, puts the security feed on a 15-minute delayed loop. It was highly calculated.
Exactly my point. It's a highly technical, quiet hack, which makes the use of a hydraulic ram totally contradictory. Why bother with a quiet, sophisticated network intrusion if your very next move is to literally blow a steel door off its hinges? It's completely schizophrenic operational planning.
It's not schizophrenic. It comes down to understanding the mechanics of emergency response times in that specific urban environment. If you just smash a camera, an automated alarm instantly pings a private security dispatcher, and they route the police. The response is immediate.
Okay, but
by looping the feed, the dispatcher sees an empty hallway and sips their coffee. Yes, the hydraulic charge is deafening, but at 3:15 a.m. in an industrial, abandoned neighborhood, relying on a neighbor to wake up, identify the noise, decide it's worth getting involved, and call 911, that buys you a crucial 10-minute window. They managed the response window perfectly based on human psychology.
I can't let you use the word perfectly when they left 2 dead bodies on the floor and their own personal evidence at the scene. And this highlights the ultimate flaw in your argument for this necessary disruption. You can spend months planning the perfect systemic disruption, but it all falls apart because vigilantism is inherently chaotic. The human element always fails.
You're talking about the dropped lighter.
The MAV lighter. Yes, it's not just bad luck. It is a profound lesson in physiological reality. Malachi experiences an adrenaline crash. You just can't outthink human biology. Once the immediate threat of the vault is over, his body dumps all that tension and his fine motor skills completely degrade. He reaches for a vape pen in the getaway car to steady his nerves, and his custom silver Zippo slips out and wedges under the driver's seat. A lighter deeply engraved with his exact initials. It is the hubris of thinking you can control chaos.
It was catastrophic, yes. But it was also compounded by environmental forces completely out of their control. I mean, they take the silver sedan to an auto shop to torch it, and it happens to be pouring rain in Philadelphia. The rain puts the fire out before it can consume the interior. The universe intervened.
The universe actively dismantled their perfect crime, which proves my point. The forensic techs find the lighter, they run the initials, the police are suddenly hunting Malachi, and this forces the desperate, horrifying pivot to the mansion. If we want to talk about moral event horizons, we have to talk about what happened in that foyer in Chestnut Hill.
Look, I won't defend every single tactical choice made at the mansion, but the leverage was necessary. Without a signed confession to accompany the ledger, the book was just circumstantial evidence of illegal gambling, not corporate fraud.
But you can't just wave away the collateral damage as a tactical choice. Let's look at the reality on the ground. They zip-tied Marcus Collins, his wife Alina, and their 10-year-old son Elijah to heavy dining chairs. Malachi is actively terrorizing a child. Terrell is sadistically taunting this 10-year-old with a hunting knife, tapping the flat side of the blade against the boy's cheek just to force the bleeding CEO to sign a piece of paper. This is the absolute proof that Malachi became the monster. He inflicted permanent, lifelong psychological trauma on a child just to get a signature. He became Marcus Collins.
I mean, it is deeply uncomfortable to process. I grant you that the scene in the foyer is horrifying. Malachi is using the exact same tools of fear and coercion that the corrupt corporate system used against his family. But to say he became the monster ignores the climax of that very scene, which is entirely about redemption. When the state police SWAT team blows those massive front doors off their hinges and a blinding firefight erupts, what does Malachi do? Terrell screams at him to use the 10-year-old boy as a human shield.
A suggestion made by the psychotic enforcer Malachi hired, paid, and intentionally brought into a family's home.
Yes, but Malachi definitively rejects it. He doesn't use the boy. In fact, as high-velocity rounds are tearing the room apart, Malachi dives over the desk, shields the master ledger with his own body, and surrenders to the police. He willingly gives up his own freedom and his own life to prevent that child from being caught in the crossfire and to ensure the evidence makes it into the hands of federal prosecutors. A monster would have picked up the child. Malachi threw himself on the grenade.
Which brings us to the cold reality of the legal system, right? And whether any legal framework is equipped to process a crime that is simultaneously an armed kidnapping, a double homicide, and a corporate whistleblowing event. We have to look at the Pennsylvania felony murder rule, which Detective Vance lays out so clearly in the interrogation room.
It's a fascinating legal mechanism. It really is the philosophical crux of the whole narrative.
Because it operates on the philosophy of strict liability. The law dictates that if you choose to participate in an inherently dangerous felony, like an armed robbery, you assume the absolute risk for anything that happens as a result of that crime. It absolutely does not matter that Terrell was the one who pulled the trigger and swung the crowbar. The justice system is essentially saying, we don't care about your noble intentions. If you light a match in a powder keg, you own the explosion. By participating, Malachi is deemed equally responsible for the deaths of Raymond and Javier Jenkins.
Legally, yes. He owns all the consequences of the environment he created. The law makes no distinction between the architect and the executioner in that specific scenario.
Precisely. The justice system correctly refused to trade 2 murder charges for corporate secrets. The ledger wasn't balanced in the way Malachi hoped. Look at the immense wreckage he left behind. 2 men are dead. Jin, who just drove the car and hacked the cameras, takes a 10 to 20-year plea deal out of sheer terror. Terrell faces the maximum sentence, and Malachi is staring down the rest of his natural life behind concrete walls. How can you possibly argue the ends justified the means when the means destroyed 5 different lives?
Because you have to look at the systemic outcome of that exact legal reality. Malachi understood the felony murder rule, and he accepted that burden anyway, because he handed that bloodstained ledger, the one with the gold embossed anvil seal, directly to the detectives. The system was finally forcefully compelled to work.
But was compelled to work because he committed a double homicide to get the book. That is a terrifying precedent for justice.
But look at the undeniable results. The federal government takes that ledger and completely dismantles Liberty Structural. The corrupt CEO goes to federal prison, stopping a decade of structural exploitation. The Conviction Integrity Unit reviews the specific signed disbursements in that book, drops all charges against Travis, and fully exonerates him. The state even pays Travis $150,000 in restitution. It worked.
It's blood money. You cannot morally sanitize the wake of death he left behind just because the legal outcome favored his brother.
I'm not sanitizing it. I'm calling it what it is. The ultimate brutal accounting transaction. Malachi went into court, pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty, and willingly accepted 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Why? To buy back his brother's freedom. If Malachi had followed the rules, if he had waited on a broken, bought and paid for appeals process, his innocent brother would have rotted in a cage while Marcus Collins continued to build an empire. Malachi performed a visceral audit. It was a life for a life.
It is a profound sacrifice. I won't deny the tragic nobility in giving up your own life for your brother's, but a functional society cannot allow citizens to calculate that murder is an acceptable operating cost for exposing fraud. The trauma inflicted on Elijah Collins, the death of Javier Jenkins, who was, just a guard doing his job to feed his family, these cannot be wiped clean. We cannot accept a philosophy where you balance a ledger with human lives. Malachi became a purveyor of terror.
It's a tension that is absolutely meant to sit uncomfortably with us. When you examine systemic corruption from multiple moral frameworks, it forces you to confront how insulated power actually is. My summary of this narrative is that Malachi's sacrifice proves a very dark reality about our world. When a system is fundamentally protected by wealth, lawyers, and institutional inertia, breaking it from the outside is sometimes the only path to the truth. His willingness to trade his natural life for his brother's freedom was tragic, but it was a justified balancing of the scales. He paid the debt the universe demanded.
And my summary is that the cost was simply too high. Yes, the corporate corruption of Liberty Structural was rightly exposed, but Malachi's path was a descent into the exact brutality he fought against. Vigilantism always operates under the delusion of control, and this story proves that the collateral damage is always borne by the innocent. You don't audit the truth with a crowbar, you just create a different kind of monster.
But, taking a step back from Malachi's specific actions, this entire debate raises an incredibly chilling thought about the future of that insulation. We spent this entire time arguing about a physical black leather binder, a tangible master ledger that Malachi could physically steal.
Right. The physical paper trail, the vulnerability of ink.
But think about where the mechanics of finance are heading today. As the world moves toward entirely digital finance, decentralized servers, offshore shell companies, and encrypted blockchain ledgers, the physical extraction of a master ledger will become literally impossible. I mean, you can't take a hydraulic breaching tool to a crypto wallet.
Oh, wow.
That is a terrifying implication. It suggests that tomorrow's corporate criminals will be permanently insulated from any kind of street-level accountability. If Marcus Collins had run his bribery scheme on a blockchain instead of keeping a leather binder in a vault, Malachi would have had absolutely zero leverage.
Exactly. The blue-collar fall guys like Travis would just be permanently disposable. There would be no vault to raid, no physical reality to force upon the architect of the crime. The digital evolution of finance might just make this kind of extreme, sacrificial whistleblowing entirely obsolete, basically sealing the vault for good.
The illusion of distance we talked about earlier, it becomes infinite. The criminals will be completely untouchable by physical consequences.
It's definitely a thought that lingers long after the story ends. The vulnerability of the physical ledger was the only thing that allowed justice, however brutal, to occur. We'll leave it to you, the listener, to form your own conclusion on where the moral center of this story truly lies. Because in the end, when the structural systems of justice are fundamentally broken and the accounting books are stained with blood. Wait, let me rephrase that. When the systems are broken, how do you ever really know if the ledger is truly balanced?
Thank you for joining us.